All right, so hey there, AP Europeans. In this video, we're going to take a look at two topics. We're really going to introduce two topics. We're going to take a look at one element of nationalism, just as a broad overview, and then how it kind of develops within the French Empire, thanks to Napoleon III. And then we're going to start looking at the beginning of the process towards national unification for Germany and Italy, which by the end of that unification process is going to cause diplomatic tensions all across Europe. Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you remember this long list of isms that we had back in Unit 6. And you hopefully remember that we talked about these middle four here quite a bit: liberalism, radicalism, socialism, anarchism. If you don't remember these, you should go back and take a look at some of your Unit 6 stuff to kind of help get everything reset for you. Nationalism is kind of a unique one in this because it is something that's going to be adapted in a lot of different ways to the point that it blends some of these other isms into this. Very simply put, nationalism is this idea that is designed specifically to encourage people to be loyal to the nation. Loyal not to necessarily to the government, but loyal to a group of people. And this is something that is will be used in different ways. One form that nationalism takes during the 19th century is through romantic idealism. Romanticism, we'll come back to it a little bit later in this unit, but romanticism is that emotional appeal. So patriotism as the emotional version of nationalism is going to be played upon by more leaders in the 19th century. And this is going to be used as being a way to kind of create the political unification that we'll start seeing when we get to topic 7.3. This is also going to be used to, emphasize liberal reform. Towards the tail end of Unit 6, we talked about how liberalism kind of shifted from being laissez-faire, leave the government out of all economic kind of decisions, to the government, well, kind of intervening more often than not, intervening to an increasing level to take care of the needs of the workers. This is nationalism because if you're in England, the government is intervening to take care of English workers. Same thing could be said in France, same thing could be said in Germany. This is going to be the government sort of taking steps to kind of, well, not just help out the workers because it was the right thing to do, but also to build up a little bit of loyalty from the workers towards the government in general. As we'll see later on in different parts of Unit 7 and going into Unit 8, nationalism is also going to play upon the ideas of racialism. Racialism and racism are very similar things. The real difference I can tell you on this is racialism is kind of a pseudo-scientific justification for racism. We will talk about that in a little bit more detail when we get into really into chapter 24, where we get into the second wave of imperialism. Part of this racialism is going to be associated with a growth of anti-Semitism across Europe, as European Jews are not really going to have the opportunity to build a nation of their own, to get a country of their own because of the actions taken by other governments. So more on that as we go into things. And then there is chauvinism within nationalism that is used to justify national aggrandizement. So we got a couple of big old like college level words in here. Chauvinism is like male chauvinism, like bossiness, but instead of it being bossiness of men, this is bossiness of the nation. That you need a strong nation to kind of play upon the loyalties of the people. You can be more proud of your nation if your nation is showing strength, but then this showing of strength in chauvinism is going to be used to justify national aggrandizement, trying to play up the importance of your country and at certain points in time to be more aggressive about how you approach this. In general, the 19th century, there is just this wave of popular nationalism that's being, kind of dabbled in all these different areas, but this popular nationalism is being used by a new generation of conservative leaders. Leaders like we will see in France and in Germany and in Italy and in other countries as well, that they are using to either create a new nation, to create a new state, or to strengthen their existing state. So a combination of an appeal to the nation of people as a way to build up the strength of the government. That's really the big trend that we're going to see here. in the last half of the 19th century. And the conservative leader that's going to do this first is going to be Emperor Napoleon III. So the last time we saw Napoleon III, he was elected as President Louis Napoleon back at the conclusion of the 1848 French Revolution. 4 years later, he declared himself to be emperor, and as Emperor Napoleon III, he is going to rule France for 18 years, which is a pretty good run of things for a French leader when you are talking about things in the 19th century. He was President Louis Napoleon, and so there's like almost immediately there's this kind of like weird sort of sense about how he is, what his role is going to be. He is the president of a country that was elected in the midst of it being a republic, but then when he becomes emperor, he doesn't really dissolve the republic aspect of it. He just kind of embraces more power for himself. I had a couple people that pointed out in the reading that he kept the National Assembly but restricted their power. And there is a reason to do this, and we'll keep that in mind. But as emperor, what he does to try to like improve what's going on in France is that he kind of embarks on this huge public works projects, trying to rebuild the city of Paris. The Eiffel Tower is probably the most notable example, but he also goes and he's sort of like widens streets and he rebuilds housing in large sections of the city. And part of the reason he's doing this is one, he's trying to do things for the people, for the working class majority that's in these cities, because this is going to assist the loyalty towards him. He's also widening the streets because, in case of another revolt that happens during his reign, he would like to be able to more easily mobilize his army in the city. Wider streets will let him do that. So, mobilizing the army aside, everything that he's got going on here is really designed to try to help out the people, the working class people being helped out with these public works projects. And then for middle class to upper class moneyed people in France, he is going to he's going to deregulate the idea of investment banks. And so if you are an investment banker, you have more opportunity to make more money. Railroad development is going to grow, which is not only going to help out transportation networks, but it's going to help out railroad owners in France, and they're going to make a little bit more money off of this as well. So what he's doing through this, even though he is an emperor and is kind of an absolute monarch in some ways, he is doing things designed to help out the people, which I think back in the fall semester we were calling this an enlightened monarch, doing things for the people because it was the Enlightenment kind of idea of protecting the people's rights. But there's also this element of he's doing this to emphasize the popular nationalism to strengthen the state. And don't forget the National Assembly, that even though it has no power, people that could vote, they were still voting for the National Assembly. And so there was this, at least this persona, that they had a voice in the government, even if that branch of the government really doesn't have that much power compared to the emperor. I'm going to leave a lot of the other details to this. There's not a whole lot of the details you need to know about Napoleon III, but I'm going to leave those to what you kind of pick up from the reading. I mean, he is really, for our purposes in class, as far as the College Board is concerned, he is a role model of sorts for other national leaders that are going to develop here in the second half of the 19th century, specifically in Italy and Germany. But there's one other event we have to get to first before we can start the unification process for those two new countries. All right, so if you're following along with the objectives and everything else that's going on screen, you're looking up here at the very top and you say that we're starting to talk about Italian and German unification, and this is true, but we're going to have to go about it in a little bit of a roundabout sort of way, because in order for that to happen, for those two countries to become united in and of themselves, there has to be a final breakdown of the old concert system, the Congress system, the concert of Europe that we kind of established back with Metternich and the boys back in Unit 6. That breakdown, the last step of it, comes with the Crimean War. The revolutions of 1848 kind of set everything up. Napoleon III and the Crimean War are going to take everything down. The most immediate causes of this in 1853 is the beginning of this, is that seems to be some sort of controversy over European claims in the Holy Lands and what was at that point in time a part of the Ottoman Empire. In 1853, the Ottomans announced they had reached an arrangement with Napoleon III and France in order to give the Catholic Church sole access to some holy relics that were there in the Holy Land. And so Russia did not take that very lightly. And so in 1853, Russia, they embark on they declare war against the Ottomans, and you have like the first Eastern European war in, well, decades. First time that you've seen one of the big four caught up in a major war since Napoleon the First went away. The Tsar of Russia at this point, it is Tsar Nicholas the First. He is somebody that, unlike Peter the Great that we saw back in the fall semester, Nicholas I is somebody that is very dedicated to the idea of sort of maintaining Russian strength and Russian pride and Russian nationalism, which also kind of means like Russian cultural heritage. And so he is the Tsar that is there since the 1825 Decemberist Revolt here until about the midpoint of what you see in the Crimean War. By 1854, however, the British and the French decide that they are going to get involved in this. The reason for this is France is at the center of what's been going on with this controversy to access to the Holy Land. That's Napoleon III. But the British are kind of like keeping an eye on this as well. And so there's some questions about the Big Four. And, just so we can kind of like balance everything out just a little bit more, it's not just Britain and it's not just France working with the Ottomans against Russia. We can throw like little Piedmont into this. If you've never heard of Piedmont, that's okay. We'll talk about them again in a day or two in class. But this is a section of Italy up on the northwestern side of what is now the nation of Italy. And this is going to become kind of crucial in the unification of Italy a bit later on. A little bit of foreshadowing right here. So you've got on one side Russia fighting against the Ottomans, but also against the British and the French and the Piedmontese. And really the most notable thing that we need to be able to take out of the fighting of the war itself is the sheer brutality that it laid into. This is the first European war where using rifles, are going to be a thing. Not just with not muskets, not front-loading muskets, but breech-loading rifles that are much more accurate from a much farther distance. And this is something that is going to begin to change how warfare is conducted. It is a much more gruesome version of warfare, and so maybe the most notable figure that we can point to out of the Crimean War. Historians generally agree that the leaders are all fairly incompetent in how they're kind of dealing with these new weapons and trying to get their strategies to adjust to it. But maybe the most important figure, and this is Florence Nightingale, who is an English nurse and is going to establish some of the first frontline battlefield hospitals in existence. And her work is going to lead directly to the creation of the International Red Cross. So you can kind of get a sense that if I'm telling you that Florence Nightingale is maybe the most important figure in the war as a nurse, as a medical professional, it is the sheer brutality of what's going on that's really going to be like the big takeaway. At the conclusion of the war in 1856, there is a negotiated peace in Paris. So another Treaty of Paris comes into play for us. By the time we get here, it is pretty clear that the Russians really can't stack up against the British or the French. That the difference in the industrialization, the difference in the weaponry, the difference in the technology they've got is very, very much one-sided. By the time Nicholas I dies in 1855, it's a year before the war really concludes, when his son Alexander II takes over. He takes over, and one of his first real goals is to get Russia out of the war, because he sees it just as being a a no-win situation, that it is going to be just dragging things out more and more the longer that Russia stays into it. We will see Alexander II when we kind of branch over towards a little bit more specific discussion of Russia in a different part of Unit 7, actually Unit 6, but we'll cover it here in Unit 7. So Russia is the big loser in all this, unless you count the Ottomans. The Ottomans are the real loser in this, so far as sort of like this balance of power that's gone on. So what you've got is like this fight between members of the Big Four. France is just on the outside looking in the Big Four, but Napoleon III is trying to raise that French prestige. But Britain and Russia are firmly two of the major powers in Europe, and when they go toe to toe here, it's really not even close. The British dominance, the industrial dominance of them, is making it clear that Russia is behind the time. But the Ottomans are infinitely weaker than that, because the Ottomans were not able to kind of hold their own against Russia. So there looks like there is just a new power structure that's going to be happening in Eastern Europe between the Russians and the Ottomans, and there's a new power structure that's going to be happening in Western and Central Europe now that the Big Four is kind of going to war against each other. This moment is seen by historians as being the final breakdown of the concert of Europe. That this element of the Congress system, trying to make sure that there is some peace and stability to try to prevent there from being any kind of continental war, this is the moment that it kind of ceases to have a real impact. And that means after the Crimean War, there are new conditions that are going to take place where Italy and Germany can unify. If you think back to the 1830 revolutions and the 1848 revolutions, unifications of people that could challenge or change the balance of power, those aren't going to be okay. But the Big Four is no longer going to have the power to be able to stop that. And so now we can move on and get Italy to become a unified country and Germany to become a unified country. And that's what's coming up for us next.